There's a moment in almost every traffic stop where things could go one of two ways. It either stays simple, quick, controlled, or it slowly starts to stretch, more questions, more pressure, more uncertainty. And most drivers don't even realize when that shift is happening. They think it's all just part of the process. They keep talking, they keep explaining. They try to help the situation, and without realizing it, they make the stop longer, more complicated, and sometimes much worse than it needed to be. But here's the truth that most people never hear clearly. There are a few simple legal moves, real ones, not internet myths, that can keep a traffic stop short, controlled, and within its proper limits. Not magic tricks, not loopholes, just understanding how the system actually works and not working against yourself. So let me ask you something honestly. If you got pulled over today and the officer started asking more and more questions, stretching the stop longer than expected, would you know exactly what to say and what not to say to keep it from going further? Drop your answer in the comments, because most people think they would, but when the moment comes, they rely on instinct instead of knowledge. And that's where mistakes happen. Now stay with me, because what I'm about to break down are 5 real strategies. Call them tricks if you want, that lawyers understand, but most drivers never learn. And number 3 is the one that changes everything if you use it at the right time. Let's get into it. The first thing you need to understand is this. A traffic stop is not just a conversation. It's a structured legal interaction. The officer has a reason to stop you. That's the starting point. But from there, everything depends on what happens next. Most drivers unknowingly expand the stop themselves. How? By talking too much. By guessing. By trying to explain things that were never asked. So the first trick is not really about what you say. It's about what you don't say. Control your words. When the officer walks up and asks, "Do you know why I stopped you?" That's not a harmless question. It's an opportunity for you to admit something. Most people say things like, "I think I was speeding," or "I didn't see the sign." And just like that, they've made the situation easier for the officer. Instead, you stay neutral. You don't guess, you don't admit. You can simply say, calmly, "I'm not sure, officer." Or you can provide your documents without answering the question directly. That's it. No extra information. Because every extra word you give is something that can be used to extend the interaction. Now here's something most people don't realize. Silence, when used correctly, is powerful. Not awkward silence, not hostile silence, controlled silence. It keeps the interaction focused on the actual reason for the stop, instead of allowing it to expand into something else. Now let's move to the second strategy. And this is where things start to shift. Know the difference between required and optional. This is where most drivers get completely confused. They either comply with everything or they refuse everything. Both are mistakes. You need to understand the difference. Providing your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. That's required during a lawful stop. Answering questions about where you're coming from, where you're going, or what you've been doing. That's usually optional, and this is where control comes in. You comply with what is required without resistance, but you don't volunteer extra information. If questions go beyond the basics, you can say, "I'd prefer not to answer any questions." Simple, respectful, no attitude. Now here's what happens when you do this correctly. The interaction becomes narrower. The officer has less information to work with, and in many cases, that means the stop stays focused and ends faster. Now let's talk about the third strategy, because this is the one that changes the entire dynamic. At the right moment, you ask, "Am I free to go?" These 4 words are not a trick. They're a checkpoint, because a traffic stop cannot legally last longer than necessary to handle its original purpose, unless there is a valid reason to extend it. So when you ask that question, you're not being difficult. You're asking whether the stop has already reached its natural end. Now, timing matters here. If you ask too early while the officer is still processing your information, they'll simply say no. And that's fine. But if you ask after they've already run your information, returned to your window, and started asking unrelated questions, That's when it becomes powerful, because now the officer has to make a decision. Either they say yes, you're free to go, or they say no, and now they need a reason to keep you there. That's the shift. You're no longer passively waiting, you're actively asking for clarity, and that often shortens the interaction significantly. Now let's move to the fourth strategy. And this one protects you in a way most people don't think about. Do not consent to searches. At some point, an officer may ask, "Do you mind if I take a look inside your vehicle?" This is not a command, it's a request, and many people say yes, without thinking. Sometimes because they feel pressured, sometimes because they think refusing makes them look guilty. But here's the reality. If you give consent, you give up one of your strongest protections. And once you've given it, you can't take it back. So instead, you say, "I do not consent to any searches." Again, calm, respectful, clear. Now here's something important. This does not mean a search will never happen. If the officer has legal grounds, they can still proceed. But by not consenting, you preserve your rights, and that matters later, far more than people realize in the moment. Now let's move to the fifth strategy, and this ties everything together. Control your tone and behavior. This might sound simple, but it's where most people fail. You can say all the right words, but if your tone is wrong, everything changes. If you sound aggressive, sarcastic, or defensive, the situation escalates. If you stay calm, respectful, and steady, the interaction stays controlled. Officers are trained to read behavior. Your tone, your movements, your eye contact, it all plays a role. So this final strategy is about discipline. Slow movements, clear speech, no sudden actions, no unnecessary comments, because the goal is not to win the interaction. The goal is to get through it cleanly. Now let's put all of this together in a real-world scenario. You're driving, you get pulled over. You pull over safely, keep your hands visible, and wait. The officer approaches. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Instead of guessing, you stay neutral. "I'm not sure, officer." They ask for your documents. You provide them calmly. No extra talking. They go back to their car. Time passes. They return and start asking additional questions. "Where are you coming from?" You respond, "I'd prefer not to answer any questions." The tone remains calm. No tension. Now the officer has less to work with. The interaction stays focused. A moment later, you ask, "Am I free to go?" Now the officer must decide. If there's no valid reason to continue, the stop ends. If they ask to search your vehicle, "I do not consent to any searches." Clear, direct. Now the situation stays within its proper limits. No unnecessary expansion, no accidental self-incrimination. And in many cases, the stop ends faster than it would have otherwise. Not because you forced it to, but because you didn't give it room to grow. Now here's the part I want you to really understand. These are not tricks in the sense of beating the system. They are ways of not working against yourself. Most drivers create problems by over-talking, over-explaining, or reacting emotionally. These strategies simply remove those mistakes. They keep things simple, structured, controlled, and that's what actually shortens traffic stops. Because once you stop feeding the interaction with unnecessary information, there's nothing left for it to expand into. So the next time you see those lights behind you, you won't panic, you won't guess, you won't rely on instinct, you'll stay calm. You'll understand exactly what's happening, and you'll handle the situation in a way most drivers never learn. And that, more than anything else, is what keeps a traffic stop short, clean, and under control.